Hello, and welcome to another vlog. I'd like to start off by congratulating the Canadian Paralympic team for coming home with a total of 28 medals, squashing their previous medal record of 19. This past week marked the inaugural meeting of the Accessibility Advisory Board. You may remember about a month ago I mentioned that I was chosen to sit on the board, which will be advising the province of Nova Scotia on how to implement their new accessibility legislation. Our first meeting was this past Friday, and I'm very pleased to have met everyone and to have gotten down to business. I think they've done a great job of choosing people with a wide range of disabilities and life experiences. There's medical professionals, educators, business leaders, and advocates from all over the province, all from different age groups. So I think they've done a good job of representing the people of Nova Scotia in that sense. We mainly discussed our mandate and our top priorities for the coming months. But based on what I heard and what went on at the meeting, I'm very optimistic for the direction things are going. This week's theme is inclusion in the workplace. It's essentially a follow-up to last week's episode, which was about inclusive education. So there's a few things I want to talk about. First, I want to talk a little bit about my personal work experience. I'd like to talk about some of the employment services that exist in my local community, and I'd also like to talk about the guiding principles of inclusion in the workplace. So let's hop to it. You may remember almost a year ago, I did an episode on inclusion, and I released a vlog that week in which I talked about some of the ways in which my teachers and employers accommodated for me over the years. Click the card if you want to see that video. So I just wanted to kind of recap on that today. So I've been employed by two different companies over the past few years. Um, First, I was employed by a company called Travel Progo, which was basically a tourism company. And then I was employed by a nonprofit organization called the Lunenburg Doc Fest, which oversees the annual documentary festival in the town of Lunenburg. Um, Now, when I first started working for Travel Progo, I did work in an office. And they had to renovate the office some so that it was accessible and that it had, among other things, a ramp and an accessible washroom. But after about a year of working there, the job changed a little and I ended up working from home, which in itself was very beneficial because it meant that I didn't have to commute to work in the morning and I knew that I had everything that I needed right within arm's reach because obviously I was in my own home. Um, and the same thing happened when I worked for Lunenburg Doc Fest. That was again a job in which I worked from home. Um, so I find working from home, it requires a lot of discipline because obviously there's a lot of distractions when you're at home. But if you do have that discipline, then working from home is, a very viable solution, especially for people with disabilities. And in today's day and age with modern technology, where you can just telecommute to work, working from home is very practical, very practical. Um, so those are some of the ways that they accommodated for making sure that the workplace was accessible. Another thing that they did was with my Duchenne muscular dystrophy, that's accompanied with a lot of heart issues. So I tend to get tired easily, and because of that, I don't work a full 8-hour day because I can't make it through an 8-hour day because I just don't have the energy to do that. Because of those heart problems. So typically I work about 30 hours a week as opposed to 40 hours a week. But I compensate for that because I am a very productive worker, so I can get about the same amount done in a 30-hour week as the average person might in a 35 or 40-hour week. Um, right, of course, there are some limitations with that, but for the most part, I am very productive. So those are really the main ways that they accommodated for me. Um, there's not really much else I could say about that. Watch the video uh, from last year where I talk a little bit about that, and so you can learn more about it. But this was more of a recap of what I talked about back then. So that brings me to the second thing that I want to talk about, which are some of the employment services, specifically organizations and agencies that I've worked with over the years that have helped me to find employment. Um, so right off the top of my head, there's two agencies that come to mind. The first is Service Canada. They don't just deal with employment related services, they also do oversee a lot of other government services. Um, but for me, I mainly worked with them in terms of employment, specifically updating my resume and gathering information about searching for jobs and things like that. Um, and I found that kind of helpful, especially when I started out looking for a job. I found that that was very useful, and then I built on a lot of those skills in college and things like that. But I found Service Canada had a lot of valuable resources that were useful for someone starting out on their job search. The other organization is an organization called Nova Scotia Works, which is essentially the Nova Scotia government's organization that oversees employment services and things like that. They really have helped me do a lot for searching for jobs and things like that. Um, Now, Nova Scotia Works has local offices, and a lot of those offices are represented by nonprofit organizations in their respective communities. So in Bridgewater, um, the agency or organization rather that oversees and represents Nova Scotia Works is Employment Solutions. I've done a lot of work with them. Not only have they helped me find these employment opportunities, but they've worked with me and my employer to find ways to accommodate for me and to make it so that I can succeed and fulfill the duties of the job to the best of my ability. They did a lot for me in that area. So those are the three main organizations that have helped me. One thing that I didn't mention earlier in this video was about how obviously where I couldn't always do all of the tasks related to my job. Sometimes they'd switch out the tasks that I couldn't do for tasks that I could. That way I was still doing the same amount of work and I had the same number of responsibilities, but they were slightly different depending on what my personal abilities are. And that brings me to the last thing that I want to talk about today, which is the principles of inclusion in the workplace. So, just like with inclusive education, I've divided inclusion in the workplace into 6 main principles, which I'm going to talk about briefly. So, the first is a safe and welcoming environment. Basically, by this, I mean a workplace that is a place where employees are comfortable working and they don't feel like they're going to be harassed or threatened. Obviously, everybody deserves to work in an environment free from distractions and free from discomfort and harassment and things like that. The second principle is open and effective channels of communication. It's very important for each employee to not only be able to communicate with their coworkers, but also with their supervisors and vice versa. And there should be a channel for expressing their grievances. Um, right, without communication, it just makes the work environment a lot less comfortable and just makes doing the job a lot harder um, because there's no way to communicate one's needs um, and to get feedback and things like that. The third thing is continuous access to employment resources. Now, employment resources can take on many different forms. It could be information, it could be assistive technology, and it could be funding, it could be a whole bunch of things. Just any resources that the employer or their employees may need to succeed. The fourth thing is an emphasis on existing skills and experience. So basically, what I mean by this is when employers look to hire someone, they need to hire someone based on what their qualifications are. In Canada and a lot of other countries, it's illegal for an employer to discriminate against someone on the basis of race, religion, sex, gender, sexual orientation, or ability. They have to base their hiring decision on that person's qualifications. Um, Now, unfortunately, a lot of employers do have biases, and sometimes people with disabilities, for example, aren't hired because of those biases. They've done studies, and a lot of people have said that they don't think people with disabilities are as productive on the job, which is unfortunate because in reality, the statistics show that people with disabilities are just as productive as their able-bodied counterparts, sometimes more so. So it's really important to focus on those skills. The fifth principle is ongoing opportunities for skills development. Um, I think in a changing workforce, it's very important for employees to have the opportunity to improve on their skills because it's important to continuously learn and grow. I'm a strong believer in that. That doesn't just allow the employees to succeed in a changing world, but also in a changing workforce. It allows them to update with the times, and frankly, that can lead to new opportunities. So I think that's very important, not just for uh, people with disabilities and other minorities, but for everybody. The last principle is a focus on equality and fairness. So by this I mean that everyone's rights are respected and everyone's accommodated for so that they can succeed in their workplace. Now, for some people, they might see this as people with disabilities getting special treatment. How come so and so gets this and I don't? But the fact is, most able bodied individuals don't need that much accommodation in the workplace. But people with disabilities often do. And that's not about them getting special treatment, it's just about putting them on a level playing field with their coworkers. Because if they're not given that, they can't succeed in the workplace. And the fact is, most people with disabilities want to contribute to society and want to go to work. And everyone deserves to be given the opportunity to do that. So that's just a quick overview of the principles of inclusion in the workplace. Um, Check out the resources in Thursday's video if you want to learn more about that. As usual, I'm going to be releasing a video on Thursday where I'll talk more about what inclusion in the workplace is, so be sure to subscribe if you want to see that video. If you enjoyed today's video, then please hit that subscribe button and don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope to see you on Thursday.